It seems to be. It's really popular or common in the United States. It's more common in Europe as well. Not so common in Japan, I gather. And the use is also correlated quite well with economic growth and GDP per capita. And it seems to run quite well with sort of rich countries do it and less rich countries don't do it. And it's hard to know which came first, the chicken or the egg, but you can certainly argue that it's rewarding staff for doing well, tying pay to performance seems to link to economic growth.
Oh, that's interesting information.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of quite complicated evidence in there, isn't there? Some of which seems to cut across at each other.
It is. It's really complicated and it's often contradictory.
Yeah.
And so coming out with like a black and white statement is a little bit nerve-wracking.
Yeah. What I can say from personal experience, having run hospitality businesses, is that you know that you don't want to put anything like that in place unless you have really solid capacity to manage it well.
Yeah.
And so I can say just from a very anecdotal perspective that there might be other small organisations and management thinking that, there's so much that could go wrong.
Yeah, and also in one sense, having just sold them, I can also say that they often disappoint and that people are motivated many people by intrinsic factors, by social relationships at work, by norms, by a sense of fairness. And too often organisations jump to an incentive bonus schemes without getting those other sort of basic things right, and then they can go terribly wrong.
Yeah, that's a very interesting comment. Thank you, Jeff, for all your comments. Dr. Jeff Plimmer on the panel now. I've just got time, I think, for this. The government will crack down on wheel clampers. It'll amend the Land Transport Act to cap the amount a vehicle can be charged for clamping to $100, so gone will be the days of the $760 fee, famous once in Auckland. No laughing matter if you were the person clamped. It's been a big issue around the country, especially in Auckland, and it's been set to music.
We gave a New Zealand Music Month concert for free. Outside the library they wheel clamped me. They fined me $200 and I had to pay $100 then and there, even though I had the manager of the Waitakere Central Library and staff standing right beside me. Otherwise, they said they would tow my car away and I would have to pay $500. We need gates on private car parks.
This song goes on to make suggestions. Have you ever been clamped? Are you happy about this, what the government's doing?
Never been clamped, but I'm happy with what they're doing. But if I did, I'd go and get a portable grinder and actually grind machine and disable the clamp.
You would do that, would you?
Yeah,
well, it's been done.
It has been done. And have they been fined for it? I don't think so.
I can't remember that
saves
case.
you everything. So, I think if they are attacking your car, which is private property, then I'd attack their clamp, which is also private property.
Okay. We'll all come along to court and have a look at what they
You'd support
decided.
me though, wouldn't you?
Sort of.
Sort of.
From a distance. Marion, nice to have your company on the panel.
Thank you, nice to be here.
Marion Elliott has been our panellist today and Barry Corbett has been with her. Thank you, Barry.
Good to be with you guys.
We are back tomorrow. Thank you for your company, and Checkpoints with John Campbell is coming right up.
Tō te mara e hoa mā he kōrero kei te haere hei kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint. Tonight, Australia is set to have its fifth Prime Minister in 5 years. We go to Canberra. New Zealand's largest feedlot, home to 15,000 cattle, is suspected to have contracted Mycoplasma bovis. ANZCO Chief Executive Peter Connolly speaks for the first time since our feedlot story ran earlier this week about M. bovis, animal welfare and the discharge of effluent. Also tonight, Air New Zealand lifts its annual profit and gives staff an $1,800 bonus, but travellers say they're paying the price with hefty domestic fares. Desperate times force a change of heart from Netball New Zealand. What is Maria Folau going to do? And Wellington Airport gets its very own leaning tower. All of that and much more coming up after the news at 5.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat and aho. Australia's Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has announced he will hold another leadership ballot tomorrow if he receives a letter signed by the majority of the ruling Liberal Party MPs. Mr Turnbull narrowly won a leadership vote on Tuesday against then Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton, who has called for a second ballot. He's backed by other senior Liberal MPs. Malcolm Turnbull says he'll call a meeting when he gets a letter requesting a fresh vote, signed by at least 43 Liberal Party MPs, a majority of the caucus.
The party room, of course, met on Tuesday and confirmed my leadership by a majority. So we need to see that there is a majority of members, and they need to put their names to it too. These are momentous times, and it's important that people are accountable for what they're doing.
Malcolm Turnbull says if a motion for a leadership vote is carried, he'll take that as a vote of no confidence and will not stand. He's also asked the Solicitor General for a legal opinion on whether Peter Dutton is eligible to sit in Parliament. The Health Minister says the government can't afford to continue to ignore vital upgrades and repairs needed at Auckland District Health Board buildings. The government has announced it will spend $305 million on Auckland City Hospital, Starship Children's Hospital and the Green Lane Clinical Centre. David Clark says the DHB has deferred maintenance, which has now become urgent. He says the hospital plays a unique role in providing specialist services to the entire country, as well as to Auckland City and Northland.
All this requires a very large and very reliable infrastructure to support it. Unfortunately, a lot of the infrastructure at Auckland City Hospital and Green Lane is approaching the end of its life or is at capacity. We can't afford to ignore that problem any longer.
David Clark, the Health Minister. The government is also stepping in to bail out 2 more polytechnics it says are in extreme financial difficulty. It's lending $50 million to Unitec in Auckland and giving Whitireia in Porirua a $15 million capital injection. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The bailouts come after a $33 million injection for the West Coast's Taipotini Polytechnic in February and the dismissal of Unitec's council last month. The institutions are among 9 polytechnics that lost millions of dollars and hundreds of students last year. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says Unitec and Whitireia asked for urgent financial help. He says the government has appointed a financial advisor to Whitireia and is considering dismissing the board it shares with the Wellington Institute of Technology and replacing it with a commissioner. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
The White House has pushed back forcefully against suggestions that a plea deal struck by Donald Trump's former lawyer implicates the president in a crime. Michael Cohen yesterday told a New York court he had made hush money payments to 2 women at Mr Trump's direction. Here's the BBC's Chris Buckler.
In a briefing at the White House, Mr Trump's press secretary Sarah Sanders repeatedly said that he had done nothing wrong and was facing no charges. On Twitter, the president went further, stating that he didn't believe the campaign finance violations he's accused of were even a crime. However, he is having to answer difficult questions. In an interview on the Fox News channel, Mr Trump said that money used to stop 2 women talking about their alleged affairs with him had been paid out of his own pocket and not from campaign funds. And he insisted that it was a personal matter, not a political one.
Chris Buckler in Washington. All schools and university campuses on Hawaii's Big Island have been closed until further notice as Hurricane Lane tracks closer. The Category 4 hurricane is expected to pass just south of the island tomorrow. Many beaches have also been closed and camping permits cancelled. Other islands in Hawaii are also under hurricane and flash flood watches. The government has announced it will fully fund a walking and cycling link across Auckland Harbour Bridge, costing $67 million. The funding for what's known as SkyPath comes from a $390 million fund for investment in walking and cycling projects nationwide over the next 3 years. The SkyPath project director, Bevan Woodward, says today's announcement is exciting.
We've been down in this area so many times over the last 14 years. As we've plotted and worked away to work out how can we deliver SkyPath. And so now to be here as a bystander and see it being picked up and carried forward is fantastic.
Bevan Woodward. A business case with more details about the design and timing of the project will be completed by the Transport Agency by the middle of next year. It's 5:05. Sport. Desperate times have forced Netball New Zealand to change eligibility rules for the Silver Ferns. The 128-test veteran Maria Folau is moving to Australia to join her husband. Folau has been granted a 12-month exemption, making her eligible to play for the Silver Ferns at next year's World Champs in Liverpool. It's a change of heart for the organisation after it wouldn't allow Laura Langman to be eligible while playing domestically in Australia last year. But the Silver Ferns' disastrous performance at this year's Commonwealth Games has forced a rethink. The team's former assistant coach, Robin Broughton, says Netball New Zealand needs to have a hard and fast rule over player exemptions.
They're going to have to tidy up all these loose ends with the players. It's not the same as it used to be where you just did as you were told. I always felt for Laura, she'd given many years of a netball career to New Zealand netball, and we needed her, and I think we need Maria and create an environment that they can work with them.
Robin Broughton. Props Tom Robertson and Sekope Kepu have paid the price for Australia's poorly performing scrum by being dropped to the bench for the second Bledisloe Cup test against the All Blacks in Auckland on Saturday. Regular first-choice loosehead prop Scott Seal, who missed last week's loss due to injury, returns to the starting side in place of Robinson. The 95-test veteran Kepu, who was regularly shunted aside by All Black Joe Moody last week, has been replaced by Alan Alatoa. That's the news.
Too close to home.
I grew up here. I went to the school around the corner and spent the first few years of my life at a house just down the road. So I know that people are talking about this.
Bringing soldiers home.
Better now than never. And if it wasn't for Mum and all the hard work from the Defence Force, I don't think any of this would have been possible, even for the other 27 soldiers that came back.
And coming home to roost.
New Zealand ferry terns are listed as nationally critical. Current estimate's about 43 of these guys, so really not many at all.
And The Bird Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espiner weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, what the Northern Hemisphere heatwave has revealed to archaeologists. And after 10, how Wellington sales rep Lisa Nimmo achieved her dream of becoming a pop singer and went on to open for Elton John. Join me, Lynn Freeman, in for Catherine Ryan on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland and Auckland. Showers, some heavy, with possible thunderstorms tonight and early tomorrow morning, then easing and becoming isolated. Waikato to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Taupo and Taumarunui. Isolated showers mainly in the west, mostly fine elsewhere. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods and scattered showers. Whanganui, Taihepe, Manawatu and Toruwhenua. Occasional rain today, fine spells and isolated showers tomorrow. Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa. Occasional rain today, showers tomorrow, retreating to coastal Wairarapa in the afternoon. Inland Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, mostly fine but isolated showers this afternoon and evening, some heavy. Coastal Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Showers with isolated thunderstorms possible about Canterbury until nightfall. Showers becoming confined to coastal Southland and Banks Peninsula tomorrow afternoon and becoming fine elsewhere. Westland and Fiordland, fine apart from showers about southern Fiordland and the Chatham Islands. Periods of rain heavy tonight. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina, and thanks everyone for being with us. Nice to have your company. Let's go to Australia, where Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull appears to be a dead man walking after a day in which key supporters abandoned him in the face of a new tilt at the leadership by former Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton. They have been scrambling and chaotic hours in Canberra, a mad kind of freefall for Turnbull himself, for the Liberal Party, for the coalition government and for stability, whatever that is, with Parliament adjourned because the leadership battle basically left Turnbull without a cabinet to turn up. 3 senior ministers who'd supported Turnbull against Peter Dutton on Tuesday now say they back Dutton. As Dutton gained ascendancy, a more moderate candidate emerged, Scott Morrison, his eyes on the camp who can't support Turnbull if he doesn't stand and won't support Dutton no matter what. What's going on? Graham Acton reports.
Peter Dutton appeared in the Senate courtyard at the Australian Parliament this morning to launch his second bid in a week to become the new Prime Minister.
Earlier this morning I called the Prime Minister to advise him that it was my judgment that the majority of the party room no longer supported his leadership. As such, I asked him to convene a meeting of the Liberal Party at which I would challenge for the leadership.
His highly anticipated comments came a short time before 3 senior Turnbull supporters revealed they had resigned their portfolios and pulled their support for Malcolm Turnbull. Among them, the key Turnbull advocate, Finance Minister Matthias Cormann.
We are very conscious of the seriousness of the decision that we've made. We didn't take this decision lightly. Personally, I know that my colleagues also have anguished over this for some time.
Matthias Cormann says he's changed his mind as Tuesday's vote on the leadership showed the depth of support for Peter Dutton.
I guess the reason we are here now is because that crystallised the views of the party room at that point, and in the context of a number of colleagues, including 5 cabinet ministers who supported Malcolm on Tuesday, indicating to me that they were of the view that there needed to be a change in the leadership of the Liberal Party.
As Malcolm Turnbull's support ebbed away through the day, the Parliament gathered for question time, only to discover the Leader of the House, Christopher Pyne, had moved that MPs vote on an early adjournment. Senior opposition MP Tony Burke was on his feet in seconds.
Speaker, this is extraordinary. What is happening right now is the government have decided that this place has fallen apart so completely that they are dissolving the Parliament for the day entirely. There will be no question time today because they don't know who their ministers are. There will be no question time today because they don't know who their Prime Minister is. There will be no question time today because those opposite have stopped governing.
In front of an almost empty government front bench, Labour leader Bill Shorten put the boot in.
The government may adjourn the Parliament, but they cannot outrun the weight of failure of this government. But the people of Australia must be watching and wondering. Surely in the bubble which passes for the current government MPs, obsessed as they are with their hatreds and their disagreements, surely they can hear how appalled Australians are.
Malcolm Turnbull now says he will step aside and call a party room meeting tomorrow, but only if his challengers can prove they have the numbers to topple him.
So I now await a letter with the signatures of a majority of the party room, if I receive, which is 43. If I receive that, then I will convene a new party room meeting. The party room, of course, met on Tuesday and confirmed my leadership by a majority. So we need to see that there is a majority of members, and they need to put their names to it too. These are momentous times, and it's important that people are accountable for what they're doing.
And Turnbull still has a card to play, with questions lingering around challenger Peter Dutton's eligibility to actually become the Prime Minister. Mr Dutton has been previously questioned over interests in a childcare business which can receive government funding. Government funding to the centres could be a constitutional problem for him, especially if he was involved in cabinet decisions on the childcare sector. Malcolm Turnbull says the matter is now in the hands of the Solicitor General.
I cannot underline too much how important it is that anyone who seeks to be Prime Minister of Australia is eligible to be a Member of Parliament, because a minister, let alone a Prime Minister, who is not eligible to sit in the House is not capable of validly being a minister or exercising any of the powers of a minister. So you can understand how important this issue is.
And as an extraordinary day ends in Canberra, latest reports suggest the Dutton camp hold at least 37 of the 43 votes they need to topple Malcolm Turnbull tomorrow. Co Graham Acton, 10A.
This has been an utterly mad day, going live throughout at Sky TV, and their Deputy Political Editor, Karen Gilbert, will join us on Checkpoint after 6 tonight. 5:14. Let's head now to very near Ashburton, between the town and the Pacific Coast, roughly an hour south of Christchurch. On Monday, we brought you the story of 5 Star Beef, the country's only large-scale commercial feedlot, somewhere in the region of 14,000 cattle, with consent for up to 19,000 on an area of 800 metres by 400 metres. Animal rights group safe, along with Fish and Game, and others are calling for large feedlots to be banned. And on Tuesday, Environment Minister David Parker joined us on Checkpoint and expressed concern about the environmental impact of such large-scale feedlot farming. You, in great numbers, contacted us to say you don't like such farming, and Zach's story from Monday has been viewed more than 125,000 times since it first went to air on Checkpoint. But we hadn't heard from Anscope, the owners of 5 Star. We asked to go to the farm, silenced. Today it became apparent why. MPI has issued a Mycoplasma bovis notice with 44 cattle brought onto the feedlot last month suspected of having the disease. Essentially, it's now in lockdown. More on that after 6. But this afternoon we spoke to Ansco's CEO, Peter Connolly, about his feedlot, the environment, the animals and the beef they produce.
We have a system which provides total care for our animals. Our animals have access to fresh water and food 24 hours a day. Every animal is checked on a daily basis, and we take great care of our animals. We care for the environment. We operate within the requirements of what we're allowed to do, and we produce a niche product. We don't administer growth promotants to animals, which most feedlots globally would do. We don't feed antibiotics to animals, which some people claim in terms of boosting productivity. The history of the feedlot, it's been operating for 27 years. When it was designed and built, the company did a lot of research around what was global best practice and looked right across New Zealand in terms of potential locations where we would have the best climate for animal welfare in the environment, and it's certainly a niche operation when it comes to the customers we service as well.
And the climate,
so
sorry to interrupt,
yeah.
but you raised the climate. The climate's important because there is no shade, is there?
No, there's no shade. So when we built and designed the feedlot, and after that time we've done a lot of research around covered versus uncovered feedlots, and so far there's been nothing compelling one way or the other to say what's best. Cattle, obviously, they're an outdoor animal. These animals are the breeds that we have on the feedlot. They're suited to the environment that they're in.
Okay.
And the microclimate of the feedlot on the coast where it's located has excellent air quality. There's a breeze that comes in that keeps the air clear and keeps the cattle nice and cool, particularly in the summer.
Okay, let's talk about the model. So it's an unusual farm, and I think some people are just catching up with the way you work. You don't breed, do you? You buy stock that are about, 18 months old, roughly?
Yes, so our model is that, and look, we've been working, farmers that supply us with cattle, many of them have been supplying us with cattle for 27 years, alongside the farmers that supply us with crops. They've been farming crops for us for feed for the same period of time. So we take the cattle in. They can be anywhere between 15, 20 months of age, and they're then put into a ration that includes grain, and they're finished on that. And on average, they're there for about 120 days. But we call them grain finished, and that's how our customers understand the product as.
Do you think the customers understand? It's really interesting, the response to Zach Fleming's story that went to air on Checkpoint earlier in the week. A lot of people have expressed surprise and in some cases dismay that we are farming this intensively. There's no grass, there's no trees, there's no pasture, there's no hills. There's just 14,000 cows in a fairly large enclosure.
Yeah, well, it's not a single enclosure.
No.
But it's there's multiple enclosures within the feedlot. But, I think you raise a good point, and, totally respect people's views and how they may see things. And, let's be honest, in New Zealand, we are a farming-based nation, and a lot of people, understand farming in New Zealand. And so they have that image of a pasture-based system. This is a different way of farming cattle.
It's commerce, isn't it? It's about commerce.
It is a bit. Ultimately,
this is a business.
This is a business. You're right, but to put some perspective around the consumer, and you've touched on the New Zealanders, this feedlot represents 10% of ANZCO's beef production. It represents 2% of or less than 2% of New Zealand's beef production.
And isn't that? But and I know you're using that as a case of mitigation. But I could suggest the reverse, and that is that in fact, it's the 98% that we sell to the world. It's the grass, isn't it? It's the story of the grass. Yep. That when people think of farming in New Zealand, there is not a person in Europe, there is not a person in the United States, there is not a person in Asia who imagines 14,000 cattle together in a feedlot with no shade, like your facility.
I think some of those markets you're talking about, they do understand that. I think what we're talking about...
They understand it where they are. They understand it in the United States. I'm just saying that isn't our point of difference grass?
Yes, I think our big point of difference is grass, and that's why 90% of the beef that we produce is grass-fed, and 100% of the lambs that we produce is finished the same way. But there is a customer out there, and 95% of the production that comes off this five-star beef feedlot is exported. And actually, when we've taken the product to market in New Zealand, and when we've given that to New Zealand consumers, they've actually enjoyed it.
Can we? Well, there's no polite way of talking about this. Can we talk about what happens to the shit? What's the word? Let's fix on a polite word. Shall we use effluent? What happens to the effluent?
The effluent in the feedlot is all contained within the feedlot. So I mentioned earlier the feedlot's built to best practice. We operate, obviously, to resource consents.
Can I look at the resource? Can I look at the resource consent? So the most meaningful consent, I think, is 30686. And if I look at point 3 of that, the volume of feedlot effluent discharged onto land shall not exceed 3,300 cubic metres per day. That's 3.3 million litres of effluent a day you are consented to discharge onto land.
Yeah, and I can't answer what we actually do because I don't have those figures in front of me, but I can find out.
But that's a hell of a lot, isn't it? That's a hell of a lot that your consent allows for.
Yeah, John, the bulk of the waste from the feedlot is actually used as fertiliser back into crop farming to produce feed. So that's where the bulk of it goes.
And in order for that to happen, it goes into a kind of treatment pond at the eastern side of the farm?
Yeah, we capture liquids and solids through that. We also capture waste out of the pens as well and collect that and store that.
And once again, that is the subject, of course, of consent. In this case, the consent is 100,899. Now, that consent allows for a leakage rate of up to 2 litres per second, which is 7,200 litres per hour, which is 172,000 litres of leakage a day before anything is even done. And when something is done, you have a year to do it. That's a hell of a high leakage rate, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't comment. I don't have the exact details of all the consents in front of me, John, so I just simply can't answer those questions.
What I guess I'm saying is, if I look at your page, if I look at your website, and you've got 5-star beef feedlot key information, you've got almost 2 pages on animal welfare. Then you've got 2 lines on environmental, just 2 lines. 5-star beef does not discharge waste into water. No one's suggesting you do, although you're discharging it onto land very near water. And you say the second line is you dispose of effluent in line with consents. And so you're falling back on consents. I look at the consents and I think, man, no one would describe these consents as onerous. I mean, these are low bar consents you're dealing with. They date back to 2005 and 2010. It's a different time entirely, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you're quoting the consents. I can't comment in terms of how we're actually performing against them because I simply don't have that information in front of me.
I just wonder. I can absolutely see the commerce in this, and also I know the global market for grain-fed beef, and there are lots of places in the world where people like to eat grain-fed beef. I just wonder if you are out of sync with where New Zealand is heading now. I mean, if we go back to your consents, and I think the consents are important because these are you know, the parameters within which you have to conduct your business. If we look at the really important, the major consent from 2005, your nitrogen rate, the total nitrogen loading rate on your soil should not exceed 455 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year. Now, we've spent the day looking. I can't find consents for anything higher than 150 kilos per year on pasture farms. That's in Waikato. You've got 3 times the nitrogen consent rate. You know, your farming is out of sync with where we're heading, isn't it?
Yeah, well, look, John, I need to obviously look at the consent so that I can answer the questions, and happy to come back and have that conversation. At the moment, I just don't have the numbers in front of me.
Is it time for Brand New Zealand to be clear about what that means in terms of farming? Or do you think that we have to be pragmatic and get with the game and understand that there are lots of countries in the world who do farm like this, and this is just the way farming is going to head?
I don't believe this is the way farming's going to head in New Zealand. And very, very much we're supportive of developing a pasture-fed beef program. This is something that we've invested in. We have a customer that wants the product. We're fully, our interest is in having healthy animals in the feedlot, and we market a niche product. We're a high-cost operation, a high-investment operation, and New Zealand cattle's not cheap. New Zealand feed isn't cheap, so we've carved a niche market out for the product we produce off the 5-star beef feedlot.
As part of your consents, you're required to provide ECAN with a kind of environmental stock take, aren't you? A kind of environmental impact report every March. Why can't we see that?
Again, I don't have that in front of me. I don't know if you've asked for it, so...
Yeah, we have. Yeah, we have.
Okay, well, I'll have a look at it. I just have to have a look at it and see what it is. In terms of our consents, my understanding is, we have a dedicated resource managing our obligations under our consents. I haven't seen our latest report. Obviously, regional councils measure compliance over a range of areas.
Absolutely.
And I believe that we operate within the requirements of our consents.
But you haven't seen your latest report, though, right?
No, I haven't seen our latest one.
Okay, which is what, from March?
Yeah. The only thing I am aware of is we're required to conduct water tests. I think we're required to conduct 4 water tests over a period, and we've in one instance we've only taken 3 water tests. But other than that, I'm not aware of any other issue.
The restaurants that are serving wakanui beef, grain-fed beef in New Zealand, do they come and visit? Do people pop in? I guess people understand the beef and the very particular quality and flavour of the beef. Yeah. Do they understand the facility it's coming from, do you think?
Yes, they do. We have, both internationally, we've had a lot of visitors to 5-star beef, and we've also had New Zealand people involved in the New Zealand supply chain there too. So I can't speak for individual restaurants, but certainly people in the supply chain in New Zealand certainly understand how we operate.
You had stockists on your website, that they seem to have gone. Why is that?
In terms of wakanui?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, some were asked to be taken down because they were probably getting attention that they didn't want. So that's the main reason.
Peter Connolly, who is the CEO of ANZCO, lots of feedback coming in. I would suggest it's fairly divided along urban versus rural lines. Text us 2101. We're delighted to hear from you, whatever you think of that issue. 29 minutes past 5. The government today put its money where its mouth is as it promised to begin dealing with a major backlog of deferred maintenance at hospitals nationwide. The pledge came in Auckland, where $305 million of urgent work on hospital infrastructure has got the government green light. Our health correspondent Karen Brown was there, and Karen filed this report.
Pomp and ceremony and smiles were the order of the day at Auckland City Hospital this morning when the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, arrived to deliver important news. Auckland City Hospital, the Starship Children's Hospital and the Green Lane Clinical Centre are in for a major upgrade. $305 million will be spent there on upgrading and repairing vital infrastructure, lifts, boilers, generators, switchboards, substations, cabling, tunnels and water systems. Ms Ardern says it's work the public and patients won't notice, but it's critical.
This funding is not for new buildings or extra capacity. That's not what the DHB told us that it needed the most.
The Health Minister, David Clark, says it's all deferred maintenance and only the beginning of a wider facilities and infrastructure remediation program at the hospital. He said it's down to years of underfunding in health and there will need to be other similar investments made in other areas of health too.
The Treasury tells us that about $14 billion worth of work needs doing over the next decade. And so we're working hard to make sure that we've got the capital set aside.
Dr Clark added the work outlined in Auckland today is only the first stage of work needed in the city. He said Auckland District Health Board was unique in the health sector by not only providing care for 500,000 Aucklanders and regional services, but also highly specialised care for the whole country.
All this requires a very large and very reliable infrastructure to support it. Unfortunately, a lot of the infrastructure at Auckland City Hospital and Green Lane is approaching the end of its life or is at capacity. We can't afford to ignore that problem any longer.
The DHB's chair, Pat Snedden, said none of the work outlined relates to earthquake risk, potentially combustible wall panels or rotten walls which have plagued nearby Middlemore Hospital.
Nobody's falling through the floor here. Nobody's falling through the floor. No rotting buildings.
He said the need for the work is down to the age of buildings and equipment, adding they do not pose any risk to current patients. Auckland was well prepared because it had balanced its books for the past 5 years and developed a major business case.
These pipes, this water supply, this kind of commitment to a more sensitised green environment is important because we are one of the biggest players in town. 10,500 staff, 2.2 billion worth of revenue in a year. We have a massive footprint.
In one of the hospital's deafening plant rooms, the engineering manager, Alan Lusick, said pipes dating from the 1960s had to be repaired or replaced, and work has already begun.
It's like at home. You had more power, more internet. The services have a capacity of finite life. So we use a couple different models. There's the economic life, the equipment life, the serviceable life. And it's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on something. You can only do it for so long.
Later on, Jacinda Ardern took the opportunity, on only her second visit back to the hospital after giving birth there in June, to meet other new mothers.
So well looked after?
Yeah, very well looked after.
So how old's your
almost 2.
Yeah.
Yes, we have a son now. A little girl.
In Auckland for Checkpoint, Karen Brown.
Coming up to 27 minutes to 6. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. Coming up between now and 6, Wellington Council gets rid of free weekend parking in the CBD. A fairly testing 24 hours for President Trump. Wellington Airport gets its very own leaning tower. Lots and lots of profit results in. Known here. Plus, we're looking in greater depth at Air New Zealand. But before it all, Katrina with the headlines.
Australia's Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull says he won't stand if there's a second leadership vote tomorrow. He says a second ballot will be held if the majority of his Liberal Party MPs sign a letter requesting it. The government has today suspended Parliament in an effort to resolve the crisis, which was sparked by an earlier leadership vote, which Mr Turnbull narrowly won against the then Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton. The Health Minister says the government can't keep ignoring much-needed upgrades and repairs to hospital buildings in Auckland. Today, the government announced spending of $305 million on the DHB's Auckland City Hospital, Starship Children's Hospital and the Green Lane Clinical Centre. David Clark says the DHB has deferred maintenance and it has now become urgent. Polytechnic is the third tertiary institute with serious financial problems the government has had to bail out this year. It's giving $15 million to the Polytechnic so it doesn't run out of cash. It follows a $33 million bailout for the Taiputini Polytechnic on the West Coast, and the Education Minister Chris Hipkins last month appointed a commissioner to run Auckland's Unitec. Senior gang leaders are helping police investigate a shooting in Whanganui in which a 27-year-old man was killed on Tuesday morning. The police say a post-mortem has been completed and the man's body has been returned to his whānau. They're urging anyone who witnessed anything suspicious to call them or Crime Stoppers anonymously. The High Court in Auckland has heard a 13-year-old boy was called a champion by his aunt when he told her about his rugby coach sexually abusing him and others. Alosio Taimo has denied 83 charges of sexual offending against 18 boys over nearly 30 years. In an interview played to a closed court today, the boy talks about how he was abused by Mr. Taimo. He said his aunt overheard him talking about it and asked him to tell her everything. She then told the police and the investigation began. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks very much indeed, Katrina Batten, which is 25 minutes away. Nona's next with business, but before that, it's a big business day. Let's look at one of the results. Air New Zealand has lifted its annual profit despite facing the headwinds of rising fuel costs and engine problems. Of course, the national carrier's profit edged up 2% to $390 million as it flew more people domestically and on Trans-Tasman routes. Investors saw their dividend rise, while all staff will be given an $1,800 bonus each. But as our economics correspondent Patrick O'Mara reports, air travellers are grumbling they are unfairly paying more to fatten profits at the incumbent airline.
Once again, final call for customers on Air New Zealand flight 420 to Auckland, gate 16. Thank you.
Air New Zealand's Chief Executive Christopher Luxon was in an upbeat mood today.
Yeah, it was a fantastic set of financial results today. We delivered $540 million net profit before tax. That was our second highest result ever, and it was really done fighting a lot of big cost imposts around fuel.
Air New Zealand's 8,500 staff will each receive an $1,800 bonus for their efforts, while investors will get an improved dividend payout of 22 cents a share. But travellers have experienced higher prices, with domestic fares going up by 5% in May, while the airline also hiked charges for extras such as baggage by up to 50% in February. At Wellington Airport, passengers feel they're paying over the odds to fly the national carrier, which is majority owned by the government and has an 80% share of the domestic market.
I think so, yeah. I think working for a government department, we're just sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul.
We have a colleague that lives in Gisborne and works here, and the cost on her is horrendous because those small town airports, the flights,
they fly regionally, it's very expensive.
Nothing we can do, and I don't particularly like the way they make huge profits.
Look at what people are paid, salaries as a start. I mean, ignore the overheads of running an airline, but I think that, CEOs could take a little bit of a pay cut.
I would say so, because I went to book my ticket a couple of days ago and it was 120, and then I booked it yesterday and it was 180. I couldn't quite understand why there was such a big jump.
Most of those in New Plymouth also felt shortchanged by Air New Zealand.
It's good when you can get buy on the grab one deals or when they have their specials. Otherwise, if you have to buy on the spot, it's very expensive.
You think that's fair enough?
I don't think so.
Funnily enough, I had to go down to Dunedin last week to a funeral, so I was desperate for seats. I got a reasonable price ticket from New Plymouth to Christchurch, and they shoved me around on the day coming back, and I got a cheaper set with them coming back. So my recent experience with them has been good.
Oh no, I think they're a bit high. Do
you reckon they could
come down a wee bit? Yes, especially if they've made a good profit.
Well, I think we should be encouraging people to travel within our own country and affordably before travelling overseas, and often it's cheaper to just travel overseas. It's not acceptable.
Christopher Luxon rejects claims the airline is ripping customers off, particularly in the regions where competition may be sparse.
That's not at all a fair comment to make. We work with those local communities to build demand through tourism so they can get high-value tourists into those local regional economies, and that's been going incredibly well. We've been growing regional New Zealand in the order of 2 to 2.5 times GDP growth over each of the last 5 years, which is a pretty impressive achievement.
Air New Zealand is a company New Zealanders love to grumble about. The airline was the 7th most complained about company to the Commerce Commission, behind ticket scalper Viagogo, but ahead of Wilson Parking. Despite the criticisms and rising airfares, the commercial director at the House of Travel, Brent Thomas, says more people than ever are deciding to fly.
We're certainly
you're not seeing people not travel. So I think we're definitely going to see more people travelling going forward, and we've had very, very little feedback about the increases in the prices of tickets.
Air New Zealand is promising more cheap fares than ever next year, offering more than 2.9 million seats for under $100. But travel agents warn would-be travellers will have to be on their toes when the opportunity comes up, or face paying higher ticket prices. For Checkpoint, Patrick O'Mara.
Well, let's turn to some of the rest of the day's business news with Nona, who's beside me, because it's been a mad, crazy day, Nona.
It has, but yesterday was worse, to be honest.
Was it? Okay, well, you're looking remarkably calm. Auckland Airport made a big profit too, didn't they? So,
they sure did. Their profit rose 95%. I know, John, look at the look on your face.
So it's doubled.
Yeah, to just over $650 million, but that also included the proceeds of the sale of their North Queensland airport. So there was, extraordinary gains there of $387 million overall.
What was the number figure?
At 387. So otherwise, that was the gains overall, not just the airport sale. So otherwise, the underlying profit would have been a more modest rise of up 6% to $263 million. Still, it's a lot of money, isn't it?
It's a hell of a lot of money for running an airport.
Yeah, but it's a big airport, as you know, and they've got a lot of costs because they need to invest in infrastructure. There's been a big increase in passenger numbers. That's part of the reason for the increase. And so they're going to spend about $2 billion. And over the next little while, one of the things they're doing is planning for a second runway.
Wow.
Yeah. And you know what? The market liked their result because their share price rose 0.25%.
NZME, they had a tougher day, didn't they? Bless them. So that's the New Zealand Herald newspaper and a whole lot of radio stations.
That's right, and that's right.
Prominently Newstalk ZB. How did they go? What was their result?
It was a poor result. They fell 53% to $3.7 million, and that included a one-time investment in digital classified advertising. That cost them $3.1 million to invest in that, and that's for a medium-term gain because they said that part of the reason their result was so poor was that those surveys that we see all the time, John, showing us negative confidence, business and consumer in the economics of New Zealand, that's coming through in their advertising. Advertisers are also concerned about that, and so are spending less on print advertising, which accounts for a great deal of the company's income. Much more, I think, 56% of it is print advertising still, and that's been in decline. So the company's looking for new ways to make money. They're hoping that their digital platform is going to pay off in the longer term. They're also going to introduce a paywall at the end of this year, but it's only going to be for some content. 95% of their content is still going to be free. This is going to be for premium content. But overall, you know what? The market didn't like that result very much. Their share price fell 15%. That's 1.5. And of course, Air New Zealand, we just saw that piece that Patrick O'Mara presented to us. Air New Zealand's share price fell 4.25%. Even so, the outlook wasn't that great.
No, and the market knew that a big result was coming, right?
Exactly.
So they were reacting to the forecast rather than the fact.
That's exactly right, Okay. Anyway, so overall, our NZX Top 50 index, it closed down 0.25%. That was 23 points down to 9,140. And that we're seeing that in Asia because there's that underlying concern about Chinese trade talks with the United States. Those are low-level talks, and really nothing seems to be bubbling up to the surface that's giving anyone any confidence there. And our dollar slipped today, and that's because of Australia and their political uncertainty. That dollar fell against the U.S., and so we followed a little bit, 66.7 U.S. cents, but we gained against the Australian also a little bit to 91.5, and we're steady at 51.8 pence.
Nona Peltier, nice work. We'll be back in Canberra after the news, but thanks, Nona. I really appreciate it. We have a small business team at RNZ, and they work very hard indeed. It's been a messy 24 hours for US President Donald Trump, with many commentators calling it the worst day of his presidency to date. Yesterday, Mr Trump's longtime lawyer, Michael Cohen, pleaded guilty to tax evasion, bank fraud and campaign finance violations, saying he'd made hush money payments to two women at the direction of Mr Trump. Well, he didn't say Mr Trump, he said the candidate, but his lawyer said Mr Trump loud and clear. That came as Donald Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, was found guilty of 6 counts of tax and banking fraud. But do people actually care And will the allegations change the mind of his loyalists? Remember, these are people who aren't that much interested in the toings and froings of Washington in many cases. So the BBC's Nick Bryan went to the Republican stronghold of New York's Staten Island to ask Republicans, Trump supporters, what they think of all this.
Across the waters from Lower Manhattan, the Trump stronghold of Staten Island, the only borough of New York to vote for the hometown presidential candidate. From here you can almost see the court complex where Michael Cohen made the explosive claim that Donald Trump directed him to commit a crime. But do people here care?
You know, he is what this country needed at this time.
Local businessman Steve Margarella believes that Donald Trump is making America great again. And yesterday's bombshell allegations don't trouble him.
So yesterday, Donald Trump's personal law stood up in court and implicated the president and said he told me to break the law. That doesn't worry you?
No. The people that hate him are going to use it, and that's all you're going to hear for the next 6 months and through the elections. That's all you're going to hear. The people that like what he's doing, whether or not they like him as a human being, are going to kill us.
On the beaches of Staten Island, what's widely viewed by Donald Trump's critics as the darkest day of his presidency casts few shadows.
I think he's great. He's doing wonderful for the country and for the world, and I can't find anything wrong with him.
Yesterday, his lawyer has said that he told him to break the law. Does that worry you?
No, not really. They all break the law, you know?
Millions of people break the law here.
But he's the president of the United States.
Well, he's human too.
But in these affluent, lace-curtained suburbs, we also found lifelong Republicans who believe that Donald Trump is bringing shame on their party and shame on their country.
Donald Trump is a con artist. He's run the country for himself. He doesn't understand that he is there to serve the people, to serve the American people.
You're a Republican?
Yes.
But you reject him?
Of course I reject him.
Donald Trump once claimed he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and his supporters would still vote for him. An extravagant boast may be, but one that speaks of his unshakable belief in the unwavering devotion of his loyalists.
That's the BBC's Nick Bryan. Fascinating to hear those voices. It's 13.5 to 6. Let's head from the US to, well, Wellington. It's not often that heated arguments over church and state coincide with car parking, but today that debate consumed the Wellington City Council chambers and the exact issue that ruffled so many city councillors' feathers, replacing 2 hours free parking at the weekend in the CBD with a $2.50 an hour fee. It was an animated meeting. And Charlie Drever was there.
No, but no, I'm just.
Iona Pannett had her work as chair of Wellington City strategy meeting cut out for her this morning, as theatrical speeches were given on the merits or otherwise of free parking. Roger Wigglesworth from Wellington Cathedral St Paul told councillors the change will impact church attendance. He suggested making part of the mornings free so churchgoers could worship without being charged. The idea was picked up by councillors who proposed an amendment to postpone parking fees until after 10 a.m, with Councillor Brian Dawson saying it's a low demand time anyway.
I regularly walked from my apartment to St Peter's Church at between 6 and 8 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and the only people I was really stepping over were the ones I was literally stepping over. There are 3 groups of people out in Wellington City at that time on a Sunday morning. There are those doing the walk of shame, there are those who are going to the markets, and then there are those going to churches.
But the chair, Ms Pannett, says she is appalled that the idea of giving churchgoers an exemption was even brought up.
I do not see how we can single out a Christian community when there are other faiths. You know, the Saturday issue was not dealt with. Hang on, no, and that's what it says. And I think this has been done on the hop with no analysis, and I do not think this is acceptable.
That didn't sit well with Brian Dawson.
I find it fascinating that we give special treatment to different groups of people all the time, but the moment someone adds church to the word, we have a problem.
The matter split the council in two, with a vote from the mayor tipping the scales against a move. Consultation had already taken place under the long-term plan, but an amendment to lower rates if enough extra money was raised from car parking fees was introduced by Councillor Andy Foster. He insisted more revenue would be generated than originally stated.
In this case, we are budgeting for a number which is not even close to what we get. We put a budget in of $1.9 million. If we get the same occupancy level that we currently have, we will get over $5 million. That is a $3.1 million surplus. Chris, don't shake your head. I've done the numbers.
Regardless of the numbers, the weekend parking fees were passed at the meeting. So from September the 8th, motorists will have to pay $2.50 an hour, regardless of whether they're heading out to church or the shops. In Wellington, for Checkpoint, Charlie Drever.
11 minutes to 6, a boy has told a court that he didn't speak up before about his rugby coach sexually abusing him because he didn't know any grown-ups to trust with the information. His former coach, Elosio Taimo, is on trial at the High Court in Auckland and is denied 83 charges of sexual offending against 18 boys over nearly 30 years. The 13-year-old's on-camera police interview has been played to a closed courtroom today. Our court reporter Edward Gay was there and is beside me in the studio. Eddie, it's lovely to have you with us as always. Although, by golly, you do tough work. The boy said Elosio Taimo had won the trust of his parents.
Yeah, that's right. And he said that the grown-ups had no idea what was going on. The courts heard how the 55-year-old Elosio Taimo was also a teacher's aide and was a trusted member of the community. The teenager told the police that the abuse started when he was just 10 or 11 years old. He said that he and other boys called Mr. Taimo Mr., and the boys would go to his South Auckland home where he would let them play PlayStation and watch movies on his school laptop.
The court's been told Mr. Taimo would call the boys to his bedroom.
Yeah, that's right, and he recalled the first time that this happened. He recalls sort of looking back to his friends in the living room and in the lounge room, and he described them as looking shocked. Once in the bedroom, Mr. Taimo handed him a bottle of oil that he kept in his toiletry bag, asked him to massage his shoulder, but the touching soon became sexual. He said that on one occasion, Mr. Taimo showed him pornography on the school laptop. Another occasion, he said Mr. Taimo touched him in front of another boy. He said the abuse happened, as he put it, heaps and up to 30 times. The boy said Mr. Taimo, who picked his victims, and he picked the boys that he thought he could trust. On one occasion, he woke up to find Mr. Taimo touching him. He told him to get lost, and Mr. Taimo apparently started crying, and he said that I do everything for you, and this is how you pay me back.
Right, so frequency was being talked about, also location was being talked about, including Mr. Taimo's car, is that right?
Yeah, and the car in daylight, in the school sports shed. The boys also got together and talked about the abuse. He said he also found naked pictures at one point on Mr. Taimo's phone. He said he deleted those and went back to playing a game on the device.
Right. How did all of this unravel? How's this all sort of ended up in court, Edward, essentially?
Yeah, well, the teenager said that one day he was talking to his cousins and he asked them if they had been touched by Mr. Taimo. When they said no, he talked about his experience, and his auntie, she was doing the laundry in the next room, she overheard part of this conversation. She walked in and asked the boy to tell her more about what they were talking about. He told her exactly what had happened, and he said that she believed him, that his auntie got angry and told the other children to leave the room. He said that his cousin had also been in the care of Mr. Taimo, and that his auntie then ran his cousin on the phone, and his cousin also confirmed that he had been touched inappropriately. At that point, she called the boy a champion. She hugged him, and she said this abuse couldn't be hidden any longer. And we know from the Crown's opening on Tuesday that she then called the police. That's how the investigation got going.
We've yet to hear from Defence, right?
We are yet to hear from them.
Edward Gay, thanks so much. Really appreciate it, Eddie. Edward Gay beside me in the Auckland studio, 7 minutes to 6. Let's go back to Wellington. Move over Pisa. Wellington now has its very own leaning tower. The capital's new $20 million air traffic control tower officially open for business today, replacing the Kilbirnie Tower, which is being decommissioned after almost 60 years. Our reporter Katie Doyle went to the grand opening, and Katie filed this report.
The Kilbirnie Tower, fondly referred to as the Grand Old Lady by staff at Airways, is retiring after almost 6 decades of controlling Wellington's skies. It's being replaced by a newer and definitely more striking building, with its lean mimicking how it feels to be caught in one of the capital's infamous northerly gales. Airway spokesperson Tim Boyle acknowledges not everyone is a fan.
Reaction has been really positive, and I've also had some people who've gone, I'm not so sure about that building yet. When you see the building up close though, especially in the sunlight with it reflecting off the cladding, it really is quite a stunning building.
But what's been dubbed the Leaning Tower of Wellington isn't just striking to look at.
It's built on base isolation, it has a significant tsunami wall protection capability, and so it's a much more resilient building. From a work environment, it is also significantly nicer and more modern for our staff.
Out on the street, Wellingtonians seem thrilled with the new build.
Oh, I really like the finished article. I doubted when they started why the lean and why that position, but it's perfect.
Yeah, no, I've enjoyed seeing it going up actually. The angles and everything of it as well. No, it's going to be a draw card for this area, really, I would think, over the years.
I like it. It always gives this weird perspective shift because it's always leaning, so I'm always feeling like the world's kind of like out of position anytime I'm only looking at it.
And it's also got a thumbs up from the General Manager of Aeronautical Operations, Ayolt Wietsma, from Wellington Airport next door.
It's a very nice, new, iconic building, and it really fits well into the Wellington environment and what we like to stand for.
The Leaning Tower of Wellington will become fully operational on Sunday, but what happens with the decommissioned Grand Old Lady is yet to be decided. For Checkpoint in Wellington, Katie Doyle.
It's 4.5 minutes to 6. Desperate times have forced a change of heart from Netball New Zealand over eligibility rules for the Silver Ferns. Boy, this has been a bit of a hot topic for the Ferns. The 128-test veteran Maria Folau is moving to Australia to be with her husband, the Australian rugby player Israel Folau, a Wallabies player, although he's out injured. Netball New Zealand has granted Folau a 12-month exemption, making her still eligible to play for the Silver Ferns and compete at next year's World Champs in Liverpool. In short, they need her. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports on this.
Maria Folau has been a stalwart of the Silver Ferns for the past 13 years. She's been a key part to many of the side's successes, from winning the Commonwealth Games gold medal in Delhi in 2010 to crashing out of this year's games on the Gold Coast when the side failed to make the podium. Folau has been selected to play next month's Quad Series, and she'll be eligible for selection for next year's World Cup in Liverpool. Netball New Zealand's Chief Executive Jenny Wiley says Folau's now free to do what she wants on the club scene.
Maria has been granted a 12-month exemption, so under our eligibility rules she could participate in netball anywhere in the world.
It's a change of heart from Netball New Zealand, who had previously insisted that players had to be competing in the local competition to be eligible for the national side. Laura Langman played for the Australian side, the Sunshine Coast, last year, but she wasn't allowed to play for the Silver Ferns. Wiley says that policy and exemptions remain in place, but the circumstances have now changed.
A couple of years ago, when we were in start-up phase of the ANZ Premiership, the situation was very different. So the board is really clear that it is an exemption granted for the situation that we now find ourselves in and the circumstances that we're in. In phase 2 of our review, we will be looking at that policy and ensuring it remains fit for purpose.
The Mystics weren't completely caught off guard by Folau's decision, but as she didn't confirm she was leaving until now, it gives the franchise just over a week to find a replacement. That's left Mystics coach Helene Wilson scrambling.
We are talking both overseas and in New Zealand to players, but I am looking for someone who is able to anchor our shooting circle, because every team in ANZ to be a winning team needs a really quality shooter in there at goal attack or goal shoot.
Maria Folau has said that she would have retired from international play if she hadn't received dispensation. But the former Silver Ferns assistant coach Robin Broughton says Netball New Zealand now needs to have a hard and fast rule over player exemptions.
They're going to have to tidy up all these loose ends with the players. It's not the same as it used to be, where you just did as you were told. I always felt for Laura, she'd given many years of a netball career to New Zealand netball, and we needed her, and I think we need Maria, and the rest of the world's catching up. So we need to move with the times and create a environment that they can work with them.
Maria Folau was unavailable for comment today. She's yet to confirm if she'll play domestically in Australia next year, but signing with the Sydney-based Swifts or the Giants would seem a logical choice. For Checkpoint, Stephen Hewson.
1 minute before 6, lots of feedback on feedlots as there has been all week. I live in Mid-Canterbury and am appalled at the 5-star beef production model. This is factory farming and is the antithesis of how we want New Zealand food to be produced and marketed to the world. ECAN has no teeth and no democracy either, and the farming lobby is huge in Mid-Canterbury and money talks. I've almost always lived in rural towns and have been around farming all my life. What 5-star beef does is not farming, and its environmental impact is out of sight, out of mind, because it's so far from town. Most people don't even know it's there. Horrified by the feedlot, we lived nearby for several years and had no idea. We find the argument that it's economically viable repulsive and find it hugely disappointing that it was granted consent. But on the other side, and boy oh boy, people feel strongly both ways. I've had the privilege of visiting the 5-star feedlot on several occasions. I went there initially determined to dislike it. I left thinking that if I were a steer, I would like to end up there. The animal welfare is of the highest standard. Every aspect of that feedlot is impressive, says Sandra. Thank you so much for your feedback. 2101. It's 6 o'clock on RNZ.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. The Australian Prime Minister is remaining defiant in the face of pressure from his Liberal Party MPs for another party leadership vote. The former Immigration Minister Peter Dutton insists he now has the numbers required to topple Malcolm Turnbull, with a vote possible tomorrow. The ABC's Jane Norman reports.
His support may be crumbling, but Malcolm Turnbull is digging in. He's told colleagues he'll only call a party room meeting and spill the leadership when he sees a petition with 43 names on it. He's also demanding challenger Peter Dutton prove his eligibility to sit in Parliament after concerns were raised about his business interests.
As soon as I get that, my intention is to hold a party meeting at midday tomorrow.
Mr Dutton has openly declared he's a contender, and Treasurer Scott Morrison is also expected to stand. If the party room meeting goes ahead and if MPs vote to spill the leadership, Mr Turnbull says he won't stand, but he will resign from Parliament.
Jane Norman in Canberra. The Health Minister says there'll be more announcements about upgrading hospitals around the country. The government today announced $305 million will be spent on vital upgrades on Auckland District Health Board buildings, including Auckland City Hospital, Starship and the Green Lane Clinical Centre. Funding of $275 million was provided in the May budget, and the DHB will find the other $30 million over the next 3 years. David Clark says business cases are being prepared. He says a national asset plan is also being put together.
I find it shocking that we've never had one as a country before in the period that we've had DHBs, and when that piece of work is finished, which is a substantial piece of work, it won't be finished in the short term, it's a longer project, we'll have a picture of the health of our assets across the board, across the country, that's comparable off an even base.
David Clark, the Health Minister. Senior gang leaders are helping police investigate a fatal shooting in Whanganui. A 27-year-old man was killed in a gang-related shooting on Tuesday morning. The police say senior gang members are collaboratively working with them to help them identify the shooter. They say a post-mortem has been completed and the man's body returned to his whānau. Extra police officers are arriving in Whanganui to help with the investigation. The police are urging anyone who witnessed anything suspicious to call them or Crime Stoppers anonymously. The White House has pushed back forcefully against suggestions that a plea deal struck by the US president's former lawyer implicates the president in a crime. Michael Cohen yesterday told a New York court he paid off 2 women at Donald Trump's direction before the 2016 election. While Cohen was pleading guilty to campaign finance violations and other charges, Mr Trump's former campaign manager Paul Manafort was being convicted of tax and banking fraud charges. The Democratic Party's Senate leader, Chuck Schumer, says the president has a cesspool around him.
What a swamp. Far worse than the swamp that existed when President Trump took over. He has not cleaned the swamp. He has made it more wretched and more fetid. President Trump brought the worst swamp we have seen in Washington's history to town when he came here.
Chuck Schumer. The White House insists the president has not committed any crime, saying such suggestions are ridiculous. Air New Zealand has overcome rising fuel costs and engine problems to lift its full-year profit. The national carrier made $390 million in the year to June, as it flew more people on domestic and trans-Tasman routes. But travellers complain airfares are too high, particularly on domestic routes where competition is sparse. The Chief Executive of Air New Zealand, Christopher Luxon, rejects criticism that passengers are being ripped off to fatten profits.
That's not at all a fair comment to make. We work with those local communities to build demand through tourism so they can get high-value tourists into those local regional economies, and that's been going incredibly well. We've been growing regional New Zealand in the order of 2 to 2.5 times GDP growth over each of the last 5 years, which is a pretty impressive achievement.
Christopher Luxon says the airline will offer more than 2.9 million seats next year for under $100. A 39-year-old man has been jailed for attacking and robbing a woman in October, then raping and robbing the 71-year-old again at her home in January. Kelly Joseph Taylor was sentenced today in the High Court in Palmerston North to a minimum of 10 years in prison. The judge told the court the victim's impact statement highlighted her courage and grace, and she is a remarkable and stoic woman. It's 6:05. Sport. The All Blacks' first five, Beauden Barrett is more than happy to have Ngani Laumape outside him for the second Bledisloe Cup test in Auckland on Saturday. Laumape edged out Anton Leonard-Brown to replace the injured Ryan Crotty in the starting midfield, putting him alongside Hurricanes teammate Barrett. The destructive ball runner has been asked by the All Black coaches to work on his communication, and Barrett says they all have a role to play in helping Laumape with that.
We're always aware of the threat he has with ball in hand and how good a defender he is and how great a player he is. He needs information from other guys to do his job too, so the onus isn't just on him, it's on the players around him. But I feel in the last few years he's come a long way.
Beauden Barrett. Meanwhile, the Black Ferns coach Glenn Moore has named an unchanged side to play Australia in the second test at Eden Park on Saturday. The New Zealanders won the first game 31-11 in Sydney last weekend. Prop Aldura Itunu has been bracketed with Leilani Perese, but Moore expects Itunu to start. The Auckland pole vaulter Eliza McCartney has pulled out of her latest event and remains in doubt for next week's Diamond League final in Zurich because of injury. McCartney withdrew from the Birmingham Diamond League meeting last weekend after injuring her foot. The 21-year-old has made progress but can't run and train fully and will miss a meeting in Germany this weekend. And India have named 18-year-old batsman Prithvi Shaw in their squad for the remaining two cricket tests against England. The tourists easily won the third test to cut England's series lead to 2-1. That's the news.
Kia ora, g'day, Paul Brennan on Nights After 7 tonight on RNZ National. Our changing world. Alison Ballance has some lowdown on ageing muscles, what happens to them when we get older, and how a little bit of exercise can make a big difference. It's been an 8-year wait for Dudley Benson's new album Zealandia. In New Horizons, William Dart will be sharing its very special revelations. And we have a window on the world, the story of Hypatia, the mathematician murdered by a mob in the learned city of Alexandria around the year 415 CE.
You can cruise sweating joggers and street mountain bikers and other outdoorsy types right at the height of their being very rugged. If you say hey to them, they just sweat and gasp and their eyes go nervous. Even straight men know what this bench is for.
That's Lately with Karen Hay, 10 p.m. weeknights on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland, showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms tonight and early tomorrow morning, then easing and becoming isolated. Waikato to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Taupo and Taumaranui. Isolated showers mainly in the west, mostly fine elsewhere. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods and scattered showers. Whanganui, Taihepe, Manawatu and Torowhenua. Occasional rain today, fine spells and isolated showers tomorrow. Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa, occasional rain today, showers tomorrow, retreating to coastal Wairarapa in the afternoon. Inland Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, mostly fine but isolated showers this afternoon and evening, some heavy. Coastal Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Showers with isolated thunderstorms possible about Canterbury until nightfall. Showers becoming confined to coastal Southland and Banks Peninsula tomorrow afternoon and becoming fine elsewhere. Westland and Fiordland, fine apart from showers about southern Fiordland, and for the Chatham Islands, periods of rain, heavy tonight. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. Let's cross the ditch again and have a look at Australia's leadership crisis, which certainly escalated today as Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull struggled to cling on to power while senior ministers deserted him. Former Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton joined senior ministers in calling for a second ballot just 2 days after losing a leadership vote against Mr Turnbull. Key Turnbull supporter, Finance Minister Matthias Cormann, said Turnbull no longer had majority party support and that Dutton was now the best person to lead the Conservative government to the next election. Dutton at the very Conservative end of the Conservative government. Treasurer Scott Morrison, seen as more of a moderate, more in the Turnbull mode, is reportedly lining up to be surprise challenger for the top job. A short time ago, I spoke with Sky News Deputy Political Editor Kieran Gilbert, who is a very good man, and we were delighted to have him on Checkpoint. And he said in a mad, chaotic, frenetic, nutty day, there is one thing he can tell us.
One thing is certain, Malcolm Turnbull won't be Prime Minister come this time tomorrow. But who will be? That remains to be seen. Will it be Peter Dutton or Scott Morrison? Scott Morrison is the current Treasurer. He is more of a moderate within the Liberal Party by tradition, and when he runs, they are expecting that he will take quite a large part, if not all, of the Turnbull support. So it really is hard to predict, but it will either be Prime Minister Morrison or Prime Minister Dutton as of this time tomorrow.
Now, Malcolm Turnbull's saying, show me the signatures. Will that happen, or will there just be a caucus move to have the vote? No,
he'll get the letter or the petition with at least 43 names on it. My last update from one of the government senior figures in the government who is campaigning to replace Prime Minister Turnbull was that they were at 37. So they only need six more names on that petition, and then that's a majority, and therefore that party room meeting will happen at midday Canberra time on Friday. And at that point, Mr Turnbull will step aside because the spill motion, when it's moved in the party room, will be supported, and then it'll come down to basically a two-horse race between Peter Dutton and Scott Morrison, unless Julie Bishop decides to run. I don't think she will, because if she does, she's basically guaranteeing a win for Peter Dutton, who she's not a big fan of, and has a different world view when it comes to their thinking on what the Liberal Party should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And by golly, there's a division within the Liberal Party, isn't there? Malcolm Turnbull is not only going to go as Prime Minister, he's going to go as an MP forcing a by-election.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me one bit. Malcolm Turnbull is not someone who's been a career politician. He is a former lawyer, merchant banker, multi-millionaire. He's not someone who sees... Well, Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister, says politics is a vocation. This is not the Turnbull view. He's done his bit. I think he sees it as he's made his contribution. He'll throw a few haymakers on the way out. No, make no mistake about that. He'll be critical of the likes of Tony Abbott. He'll be critical of elements of the media, which he believes have been a part of his downfall. And then he'll sail off into the sunset with his very successful in her own right, successful wife, Lucy Turnbull. So that'll be it. He'll go, but the implications in the House of Representatives are quite large because the government's only got a majority of one. So therefore, pending that by-election, they lose that majority of one and they'll be governing with the help of the crossbench.
Yeah, and it's a coalition government with a majority of one, so they are already stretched. It is absolutely fascinating to watch Bill Shorten start to look good, which shows you how low the bar of Australian politics is at the moment, bless them. And Labor are they're beaming. And so the Liberals are in disarray, although we know the Liberals are pragmatic about reforming after disarray. But this is playing to Labor's hands magnificently, isn't it?
They've rolled out the red carpet to Bill Shorten. They've rolled out the red carpet to him entering the Lodge, which is the prime ministerial residence in Canberra. He is the red-hot favourite now. To be honest, I don't see how he won't win. He's no Barack Obama in terms of being a great orator. A lot of people criticise him for being not the greatest communicator or politician, but what he has done, to his credit, is keep a unified team now for 5 years. And I think with that in mind, he will win on the basis of that. And to be honest, John, as well, his front bench is also a very strong front bench. He's got some really good people on that in that lineup, and I think for many observers of politics, I think for many voters, the election can't come soon enough.
Kieran Gilbert, who is Sky News' Deputy Political Editor. So all of this is happening tomorrow. We will, of course, cover it at length tomorrow evening on Checkpoint. It does look likely Australia will have a new Prime Minister. It's 14 minutes past 6. Let's return now to Ashburton, where New Zealand's largest feedlot has been issued with a notice of direction by the Ministry for Primary Industries after 44 cattle are suspected to have contracted Mycoplasma bovis. It seems they arrived with it in July. The farm, which is owned by ANZCO, has come under scrutiny this week after Zach Fleming's story here on Checkpoint on Monday night featured drone footage of the intensive farming operation supplied by animal welfare group SAFE, who, it has to be said, oppose large-scale feedlot farming. The footage showed roughly 15,000 cattle in square uncovered pens with no shelter feeding on grains. The feedback on Zach's story was unprecedented, even causing Wakanui Beef, the label under which the beef is marketed, to remove a list of stockists and restaurants from its website. Now, we wanted to speak to ANZCO boss Peter Connolly about animal welfare and effluent from the feedlot. We'd been asking all week for an interview. In fact, we asked to go to the farm to see the animals for ourselves. People do say that that is an illuminating experience. This morning, ANZCO told us Mr Connolly would be available, but it was not possible to do an on-site interview because the farm had those suspected cases of M. bovis and was essentially in lockdown. I asked Mr Connolly what more he could tell us about M. bovis.
Today we came out with an announcement that 5 Star Beef had been issued with a notice of direction from NPI. That follows an intake that we had into the feedlot in July of 44 cattle from a supplier who's subsequently been found to have infected cattle. So we've been working through this situation over the past week or so, and what we have done immediately, once we learnt of these cattle on the feedlot and were notified, we immediately quarantined the cattle. So they're isolated, they're in an isolated location on the feedlot. We've implemented controls both into and out of the feedlot, and we're following NPI best practice guidance in that regard. And we'll just continue to work with and take direction from NPI at the moment.
How many cattle do you have in the feedlot at present, overall?
So at present, we've got about 15,000 cattle on the feedlot. We're consented to have up to 19,000. We kind of operate, depending on the time of the year, at around 14,000 cattle on average at any one time. But at the moment, we're just over 15,000 cattle.
And so, given the 44 have been there, since July, what is the risk of contamination, do you think?
They've been in the feedlot for probably four weeks or so. In terms of contamination, I can't really answer it until we do some further testing. So what we have done is we've isolated those cattle and the cattle that they were with, and we'll be conducting further testing probably over the next 4 or so weeks with NPI of the cattle that were around where they were originally located, to see if that shows whether the disease is spread within the feedlot.
Peter Connolly, the longer interview we did with him about the bigger issues around feedlot farming Wentzwear after 5 o'clock is now available online. We should say that Peter Connolly said that we would be absolutely welcome to visit the farm once the M. bovis lockdown has been lifted. It's 6:17. Now, as I said, we've been inundated this week with feedback about the feedlot, alongside the feedback specifically discussing feedlot versus open pasture. Many of you have also been saying that there's no reason for cattle to be fed grain in New Zealand because we have so much grass. ANZCO, which owns the 5 Star Beef feedlot, says there is a niche market of people who do want grain-finished beef for taste reasons, more marbling, it's quite distinctive. So that got us thinking, can people actually tell the difference between grain-fed and grass-fed steak? We sent our reporter Zach Fleming and our cameraman Nick Monroe to find out, and they went to Giraffe, a restaurant at Auckland's Viaduct owned by chef Simon Galt. Now, Simon Galt acted as our control. He cooked us 2 Scotch fillet steaks identically, he promised. One was 100% grass-fed, the other was grain-finished.
So we're going to have the battle of the grass fed and the grain fed. This theoretically should be more tender with the grain. Shall we cook them and try it out? Yeah. Let's go.
Rub that in.
They feel happy already.
Still remember which one's which?
I remember. Personally, I love grass-fed. I love the taste of it. I'm used to it. Most importantly, I want to know where the cattle come from. I know our eye fillets here graze next to the Waikato River. They have a beautiful life. So at Giraffe, we have both options. We have grass-fed eye fillet. We also have an Australian meat, and I love getting Australian meat. Why? Because it's buggering up their soil and it's buggering up their rivers. You know, it's horses for courses. Some people love grain, some people love the grass.
So there are definitely some people who think that they can taste the difference.
For sure.
Do you believe that they can taste the difference?
I believe you'll be able to tell the difference, yes. Look at that, beautiful and juicy.
There we go.
All right, have fun.
First we gave people the grain, then second they tried the grass.
Can you tell any difference?
No, there's certainly a difference. I mean, the first one was a lot more tender, but I actually think there was probably more taste in the second one.
The second one was tastier, so it would be my perception that the first one would be grain and
the first one was grass, I'd say.
The first one was definitely way more like tender, like quite a lot softer, but the second one had way more flavour, so I'd pick the second one like any day over the first one. So I reckon,
way more flavour?
Yeah, way more flavour.
First one was tastier.
The first one had less flavour than the second one, so I'm going to go with the grain fed for the second one.
So you thought that this one, which you think is the grain, was more flavours in?
Correct.
I preferred the texture and the taste of the steak here.
He liked the grain.
What do you prefer?
Probably this one.
She liked the grass.
So chew, have a think about it, see how you feel.
First one's grain fed, the second one's not.
You prefer the first one?
The first one I'd go with grain and the second one I'd go with grass. I did enjoy the first one more than the second one.
The first one was grain and the second one was grass. I'll choose the second one.
The first one was the grass and the second one was the grain. I prefer the first one.
Yeah, I think I actually preferred the first one. And I thought the first one was actually grass-fed. Had a bit more of a gamey flavour.
Fully grass-fed one was the second one.
So my preference is probably the second one. I like the fact that it's less dense and more flavoury and juicy over time, so I'm going to go with the second being grass-fed.
Obviously it is not like a huge difference, and it's just steak at the end of the day.
Does it actually matter whether it eats grain, whether it eats grass? What do you think?
I think what we're lucky for in New Zealand is we actually have a choice now. If you love grass-fed meat, you can buy it. If you like grain-fed, you're going to pay a premium for it. And I don't think we should be knocking the people that are trying to offer something different, because definitely the tourists that come to New Zealand, and we need to wake up, we are a tourism country, they might want grain-fed, and they might want a mix of the grass and grain, or they might just want to try grass-fed. I want to know where it comes from. I want to know if it's from grain, where's the feedlot, how are they looking after the cows, how old are they, and if it's grass-fed, I want to know. Like my guys that I serve in here graze next to the Waikato River. They have a beautiful view. They're happy cows.
Simon Gold talking to Zach Fleming. For those of you who were listening but not watching, the final tally was 9 preferring grass and 7 preferring grain. So 9-7, pretty close really. It seemed to me that people did a pretty good job of telling them apart. More knew than didn't know which was which. After more than a decade of planning, the government has announced it will fully fund a walking and cycling link across Auckland's Harbour Bridge. $67 million from the National Land Transport Fund will be invested in the link, known as SkyPath. Transport Minister Phil Twyford says the funding is a major step towards building a more modern transport system in New Zealand. Katie Scotch was at the announcement and filed this report.
The government will fully fund SkyPath across Auckland's Harbour Bridge.
The Transport Minister Phil Twyford, flanked by Acting Associate Transport Minister James Shaw and Auckland Mayor Phil Goff, made the funding announcement at Northcote Point, overlooked by the Harbour Bridge. The walking and cycling path across the bridge, dubbed SkyPath, has been in the works for more than a decade. Mr Twyford says a detailed business case is already underway and will be completed by the middle of next year, but there is no clear date for completion.
Those decisions haven't been made and will just be making life more difficult for all of the people working on the project. But it's going to happen in the next few years. This is a big project. We're still doing the detailed design work on it, and then there's a procurement process, and then there's the construction phase. But make no mistake, we want to see this SkyPath built as soon as possible.
The public-private partnership initially set to fund the project meant users would have to pay $2 to $3 admission to cross the bridge each way. Mr Twyford says that is no longer the case.
I don't want to see prices be a barrier to Aucklanders walking and cycling across the harbour. So no, there won't be a PPP.
SkyPath director Bevan Woodward has been pushing for the instalment of the $67 million pathway for 14 years. He said today's announcement was an exciting moment.
We've been down in this area so many times over the last 14 years as we've plotted and worked away to work out how can we deliver SkyPath. And so now to be here as a bystander and see it being picked up and carried forward is fantastic.
Resource consent was originally granted for the project in July 2015 by independent commissioners, but was appealed by several community groups who said it would ruin their tranquil neighbourhood. In 2016, the Environment Court granted the project its resource consent, stating at the time SkyPath would regulate and minimise effects on the environment entirely adequately. Barb Cuthbert from Bike Auckland says it's been a long road, but today's announcement is a win.
Honestly, if any project was tested, reviewed, scrutinised, it is SkyPath. In terms of equity, it's fabulous that now people won't have to pay for it, because I reckon we've paid for it. We've absolutely toiled for this project. Auckland deserves it.
The $67 million funding announcement is part of a $390 million investment in walking and cycling projects nationwide over the next 3 years. Details around how the remaining $323 million will be spent are expected to be released next week. I tamaki makoto mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Katie Scotcher tēnei.
26 minutes past 6, we're coming up to the weekend, so let's do some sport. As the usual, tweaks are made to the All Blacks side for Saturday's second Bledisloe Cup test. One almost constant presence over the past 9 years is preparing for a significant milestone. Now, Ryan Crotty and Rieko Ioane are both out injured. Hurricanes backs Ngani Laumape and Geordie Barrett make their way into the starting lineup for the clash with the Wallabies in Auckland. In the forwards, though, the same 8 men will try and help seal the Bledisloe for a 16th straight year. That's not the same 8 men for 16 straight years, it's the Bledisloe for 16 straight years. And as Clay Wilson reports, the same man who has carried out arguably sport's toughest job, or rugby's toughest job, will this Saturday join one of rugby's most elite clubs.
The Franks family aren't prone to the soppy stuff. But as he gets set to become just the 9th All Blacks centurion, Owen Franks admits older brother and former All Blacks prop Ben had made an effort to convey his congratulations.
I did actually get a text from him this morning. He said something along the lines of, you know, proud of me and that. And then he said, don't text back because it'll be awkward. That's probably the most emotional I've ever gotten. I actually sent back a smiley face. So, yeah, that's quite funny.
While his older brother preferred the short and sweet method, Franks' teammates and coaches offered more insight into his immense durability. Beauden Barrett lauded the tight head prop as the squad's most professional member, while meticulous preparation and dedication to his body are constant themes. Commitment to his career, as coach Steve Hansen noted, is something Franks takes very, very seriously.
He's 120%er. Not many people would go to their wedding and get their wife to have a protein shake in her pocket.
Franks happily admits he doesn't leave things to chance when it comes to food. And after 89 starts in an All Blacks jersey, the same goes for looking after his robust 30-year-old frame.
I do some stretching. I wouldn't call it yoga because I'm not into the spiritual side of it, and I don't know the names of the poses, the dogs and downwards and whatever, but when you first start, it's funny, you know, you go into the gym and just rip into your weights, and as you get older and your body gets stiffer, you have to grease the joints.
A lack of yoga vernacular isn't a surprise for a man who uses words only when they're an absolute necessity. But as All Blacks hooker Cody Taylor recounts of his first training alongside Franks, that doesn't mean his presence isn't felt.
Yeah, he was a pretty intimidating man when I first come in, to be honest. I actually saw him have a punch-up with his own brother at training, which was, I was pretty blown away by. I was like, geez, this guy doesn't take a backward step even to his own blood. So that was pretty impressive, actually, and that sort of set the standard for what he was about.
It's a standard Franks has not only maintained, but lifted as he has morphed from a master of the dark arts into a ball-playing prop, happy to plonk himself in the middle of the world's best backline. Barrett says Franks' place in the squad and on the team bus is as clear-cut as it gets.
He's our backseat man. There's no rubbish with Owie, it's just straight up and down, black and white. You don't want to cross with him. He's a very good man at the same time. If you get the chance to sit down with him and have a chat, he's a great human.
For all that, there remains one way in which Franks is yet to contribute. After 99 tests, he is yet to crash over the try line for the All Blacks. It's a remarkable statistic, but not one Hansen says the man himself is sweating on.
He doesn't see himself as a try scorer, he sees himself as someone who lifts on the line, that pushes in the scrum, cleans in the breakdown and catches and passes when he has to. And if he scored a try, I'm sure he would be chuffed. But if he doesn't score one, he'll have another record anyway, so can't lose, can he? And you're right, he don't give a stuff.
As long as the scrum is straight and solid and his team comes out on the winning side, Owen Franks should be able to squeeze out a smile as he trudges off Eden Park, officially an All Black centurion. Moti hotaka o tia hipo nei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
Thanks, Clay. That's Checkpoint for tonight. Thanks so much for your company. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Malcolm Turnbull says his rival Peter Dutton must prove he's eligible to sit in the Australian Parliament if he wins a leadership vote likely to go ahead tomorrow. The head of ANZCO, which runs a controversial 14,000 cow feedlot near Ashburton, says it's just a different way of farming and is a fraction of their beef production. The Health Minister has signalled an audit of all of the country's hospitals following today's $305 million boost for Auckland DHB buildings. And senior gang leaders in Whanganui are helping the police investigate a shooting on Tuesday morning in which a 27-year-old man died. Our next news and weather is at 7.
It's been an 8-year wait